The Foundational Epistemic Standards of Mystrikism, Part 1 of 2.
Mystrikism stands on a set of fundamental methodological commitments, core epistemic standards without which we could not know anything that we do know. These are not merely dogmas or mere beliefs. They are the can't-do thinking without 'em tools that every mystic wields to investigate reality. In the spirit of the scientific method, mystics are dogmatic about method, not truth. We draw a hard line around how beliefs must be formed, through evidence, logic, and constant openness to correction, while refusing to draw hard lines around what must be believed. In other words, any claim is fair game for criticism, or even ridicule, if it doesn't play by the rules of honest inquiry. These rules include reliability, objectivity, verification, reproducibility, relevance, transparency, empiricism, if applicable, logical coherence, and falsifiability, R.O.V.R.R.T.E.L.F, each a bedrock principle that makes knowledge-seeking possible. The very same R.O.V.R.R.T.E.L.F criteria we use to evaluate evidence as part of our integrated principles of science. Importantly, these standards are rational commitments. They're choices mystics make to minimize self-deception and error, much like scientists following best practices. This approach is woven into Mystrikism's DNA. Mystrikism is rooted firmly in rational inquiry, evidence, and a provisional understanding of truth. By embracing these standards, mystics align with scientific naturalism, sticking to natural evidence and causes, and uphold a worldview that conditionally rejects the supernatural without surrendering humility, ethics, or awe. Each standard below is a pillar of our worldview, ensuring our pursuit of truth remains honest, humble, just, and filled with wonder at the unknown. Standard 1. Reliability and consistency. Reliability means our findings aren't one-off flukes. They hold steady across time and place under the same conditions. In mystical inquiry, we provisionally accept that nature has an underlying consistency. The laws of reality aren't random whims. This belief is so fundamental that without it, inductive reasoning would collapse. As one illustration of this uniformity of nature, scientists assume that if an experiment works today, it will work tomorrow under equivalent conditions. Only under this assumption does learning from experience make sense. In practice, when evidence is reliable, different observers can repeat observations and see the same patterns emerge. A reliable claim is repeatable and predictable, not a wild coincidence. Mystics won't hang their hats on an idea that only works once or inconsistently. If a supposed phenomenon keeps changing its story, we suspect it's not real. Reliability is thus a premise of all inquiry. We expect reality to play fair and not shift the goalposts arbitrarily. Think of a simple household scenario. Say you're testing a new coffee brewing method. If one morning the brew tastes superb, but every other time it comes out awful, using the same steps, you'd question the method's consistency. Similarly, a mystic expects that boiling water at sea level today is 100 degrees Celsius and will also boil at 100 degrees Celsius tomorrow under the same conditions. If it didn't, we'd suspect our measurements or understanding were wrong. This commitment to consistency is like trusting a dependable friend. If reality weren't dependable in the same way, we couldn't form any reliable knowledge at all. Indeed, as Hume noted, without the assumption that nature is uniform and consistent, inductive science would not actually work. Mystical thinking starts with trusting that truth isn't capricious. Standard 2. Objectivity, bias resistance. Objectivity is the commitment to see things as they are, as free from our personal biases and wishes as humanly possible. Mystics recognize that the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool, paraphrasing Feynman. In practice, objectivity means actively resisting the lenses of prejudice, desire, or fear that can distort our perception. It's a promise to be fair with the evidence, even if the evidence delivers news we don't like. This standard is closely tied to intellectual honesty and humility. We would prefer to admit, "I was wrong," than distort reality to save face. To achieve objectivity, mystics and other rational people employ tools like controlled experiments, standardized measurements, and peer review. Anything that helps pry our findings away from the grip of individual bias. An objective approach ensures that a study's outcomes aren't skewed by the researcher's hopes or hidden agendas, and it invites others to double-check results. As a result, objectivity in science tends to make findings independently reproducible by others. In short, being objective is about getting ourselves out of the way of the truth. Picture a detective investigating a case. If she's convinced from the start that the butler must have done it because of a personal hunch, she might ignore evidence pointing to another suspect. Her bias can blind her to the truth. A good detective, like a good mystric, steps back and lets the evidence lead the story, maybe the fingerprint analysis or security camera footage, rather than clinging to a pet theory. In science, this could be a researcher who really hopes their new drug works wonders. Objectivity is when they still report it accurately, even if the data says the drug barely works at all. By consciously checking our biases at the door, we follow where reality leads. This is not easy, as humans love to fool themselves, but it's essential and something to strive for. Objectivity ensures that what we call true isn't just our imagination or desire, but something that stands up to scrutiny by anyone, anywhere. Standard 3. Verification, independent cross-checking. No matter how brilliant or persuasive a claim sounds, a mystric insists on verification. This means we don't fully trust a claim until it's been checked and confirmed by independent sources or methods. It's the antidote to gullibility. We have a saying, "Don't trust until it's verified." In fact, mystrics prefer that over the adage, "Trust but verify," because we'd rather withhold belief until solid confirmation is in hand. One scientist shouting "Eureka" in a lone study is not enough for us to pop the champagne. We wait for others to replicate the experiment or for additional data to support it. If nobody can verify the result, then to us it's just fresh noise, not knowledge. This attitude guards against being misled by error or fraud. Independent cross-checking can take many forms: scientists reproducing each other's experiments, journalists fact-checking claims with multiple sources, or simply double-checking your math homework by doing the problem a different way. The core idea is that truth isn't a one-person show. It emerges when many eyes, minds, and tests converge on the same result. Imagine you hear a wild rumor that a certain food ingredient cures headaches instantly. A single internet testimonial swears it worked for them. A mystrically-minded person won't accept this at face value. They'll look for verification. Are there independent studies or clinical trials showing the same effect? Can other people try this and report the same cure? If 10 different researchers across the world test the ingredient and none of them see any pain relief benefit, that's a pretty strong indication the original claim was false or at least exaggerated. It's like hearing a sensational piece of news. You would check multiple reputable news outlets to see if it holds up. By cross-checking facts, asking, "Did anyone else witness this?" we filter out flukes and fabrications. This commitment to verify claims also means Mystrikism has little patience for hearsay. Extraordinary claims require at least some ordinary proof. As mystrics put it bluntly, a claim that can't be verified might as well be a fairy tale until proven otherwise. Standard 4. Reproducibility. Reproducibility is a close cousin of verification, but it deserves its own spotlight as a standard. A result is reproducible if independent investigators can achieve the same result following the same procedure. In science, reproducibility is huge. It's considered one of the foundations of the entire scientific method, a benchmark upon which the reliability of an experiment can be tested. Mystrics take this to heart. If someone claims they've discovered a new particle, we expect that other labs using the same methods can find that particle too. If a psychologist reports a surprising experiment, we look for other psychologists to reproduce it with fresh participants. If findings only ever occur for one person or one team and never again, something is fishy. Either there was a mistake, or some hidden factor is at play. Reproducibility is basically reality's echo. A true effect should echo back when called upon repeatedly. Demanding reproducibility protects us from fooling ourselves with one-off anomalies or wishful thinking. It's also a guardrail against fraud. Made-up results generally can't be repeated by honest researchers. In sum, if knowledge isn't reproducible, it won't earn Mystrikism trust. Think of a cookbook recipe. If the recipe is sound, any competent cook who follows it should end up with the same delicious dish. If only the original chef can get it right, but everyone else's attempt falls flat, you suspect the recipe might have left something out or gotten something wrong. Similarly, in 1989, two chemists famously claimed they achieved cold fusion, a revolutionary energy-producing reaction, in their lab. The announcement caused a stir, but when other scientists around the globe tried to reproduce the experiment, none succeeded. The claim collapsed because it lacked reproducibility. On the flip side, consider how consistent something like the law of gravity is. Drop an object anywhere on Earth, and it will accelerate downward, every single time. That universality is why we accept it as a law of nature. Mystrikism inquiry leans on such consistency. We find comfort and confidence in results that anyone can reproduce independently. It means we're likely dealing with a real facet of reality, not a fluke or fabrication. Standard 5. Relevance. Relevance is about staying focused on evidence and reasons that actually matter to the question at hand. It sounds obvious, but this standard is often overlooked. People can drown an argument in facts or appeals that, while true or impressive sounding, are completely beside the point. Mystrics train themselves to ask, does this piece of information truly support or refute the claim, or is it a distraction? We recognize that irrelevant evidence can muddy discussions and confuse people into accepting or rejecting claims for the wrong reasons. Therefore, part of our epistemic ethic is to strip away the fluff and lock onto the pertinent data. In practical terms, this means that if we're investigating a hypothesis, we only consider facts that have a logical bearing on it. We won't be swayed by emotionally charged but unrelated information, nor by statistics that don't actually address the core issue. By filtering for relevance, Mystrics aim to avoid the common pitfall of being impressed by irrelevant data. This is also a guard against bias. We don't cherry-pick tangential facts just because they favor our preferred conclusion. Every piece of supporting evidence must earn its keep by genuinely illuminating the claim. Suppose scientists are studying whether a new drug improves memory in the elderly. An irrelevant piece of evidence would be something like citing the drug's manufacturing cost or the fact that it comes in a pretty blue pill. Those have no bearing on whether it works. Even more insidiously, one might be tempted to include data that this drug also happens to improve athletic performance in young adults. Interesting, perhaps, but not relevant to memory in seniors. As one Mystrikism text notes, if you're investigating caffeine's effect on sleep quality, data about caffeine's impact on athletic performance, while interesting, is irrelevant to that question. It would only distract from the real issue. In everyday life, imagine you're debating whether your town should build a new library. A relevant point might be how many people in the community lack access to books, or the library's effect on literacy. An irrelevant point would be bringing up the mayor's unrelated scandal from last year. It might sway emotions, but it's not logically connected to whether a library is needed. By keeping our focus where it belongs, we uphold intellectual honesty and ensure we don't fool ourselves with flashy but empty arguments. The Foundational Epistemic Standards of Mystrikism, Part 2 of 2. Standard 6, Trustworthiness and Transparency. For knowledge to flourish, there must be trust, and trust is earned through transparency. Mystrikism holds that how we arrive at a conclusion is just as important as the conclusion itself. We commit to laying our cards on the table, exposing our methods, our data, our uncertainties. In the scientific world, this is akin to publishing your experimental procedure and raw results so that others can inspect, critique, and build upon them. In fact, sharing methodologies and data so that other researchers can verify and extend findings is not just good practice. This transparency is essential for maintaining trust in scientific conclusions. When people can see for themselves how a result was obtained, they have reason to trust that result. Conversely, secrecy or obscurity breeds doubt. Mystriks champion open inquiry and honesty at every step. If someone claims to have a cure for an illness but won't reveal how they tested it, we remain skeptical. If a guru says, "Just believe me," without showing evidence, we walk away. Truth doesn't require dark corners, it welcomes the light. It's worth noting that this principle isn't only high-minded, it has been learned through hard lessons. When transparency lapses, errors and even fraud can proliferate, leading to crises of confidence. In recent years, science has grappled with a replication crisis where many published findings could not be reproduced by others. Some of these failures were due to hidden biases or selective reporting, in short, not being fully transparent. The result was a shakeup in public trust. Mystrikism takes such cautionary tales to heart. We treat trust as something to be continuously earned by being as open and clear as possible about what we know and how we know it. This is also an ethical stance. It reflects our commitment to truth and justice. Deception or withholding key details is seen as an almost moral failing in the pursuit of knowledge because it leads others astray. By being transparent, we ensure that conclusions can be checked and corrected, which makes our collective understanding stronger and more trustworthy. Consider why many people prefer restaurants with an open kitchen. When you can watch the chefs at work, see the ingredients and cleanliness, you feel more confident that the food is prepared well. Transparency in the kitchen builds trust with customers. In contrast, if a restaurant hides everything behind closed doors and refuses health inspections, you'd reasonably suspect something's amiss. In the realm of ideas, the same applies. A climate scientist who publishes not just her conclusions but also her raw data and computer code is essentially saying, "Don't take my word for it. Look for yourself." This openness invites trust and collaboration. Other scientists might even spot an error that she missed, which ultimately benefits everyone. On the other hand, imagine a policymaker who claims a new law is effective but refuses to share the study or statistics backing it up. Without transparency, why should anyone trust the claim? Mystrikal doctrine would call that unacceptable. We strive to always be able to answer, when asked, "How do you know?" and to answer in detail. In doing so, we foster a culture where truthfulness is rewarded and charlatanry withers in the light. Standard 7. Empiricism, Observation, and Measurement. At its core, Mystrikism is deeply empirical. That means we rely on observation, experience, and measurement of the natural world as the primary sources of knowledge. We don't accept "because I said so," or "because an ancient book said so," or "because it feels true" as sufficient reasons to believe a claim about reality. If something is true about nature, then nature itself will, in principle, provide some indication of it, a footprint we can detect, a pattern we can observe. This commitment aligns with the scientific method's stance that no amount of pure reason or faith can substitute for observable evidence. We certainly use reason, but it's tethered to empirical inputs. Mystriks fully reject appeals to revelation, divine authority, or unfalsifiable intuition as paths to truth. It's not that those things aren't emotionally powerful, it's that they have a terrible track record for reliably describing reality. Instead, we treat the universe like a grand experiment in progress. We ask questions of it through hypotheses and let the answers come back in the form of data. Even when grappling with big abstract ideas, we circle back to what can be observed or measured. In short, Trust in evidence, not faith, is a Mystrikal mantra. Empiricism also fuels Mystrikism's sense of wonder. Rather than seeing the natural physical world as disenchanted, we see it as astonishing precisely because it is real. Every star we observe in a telescope, every species we document in a rainforest, every particle we smash in an accelerator. These are like nature's own poetry, written in a language we're learning to read. By insisting on observation, we keep ourselves honest, but we also keep ourselves in contact with the actual magic of reality, the kind that stands up under scrutiny. Mystrics believe that if you have to close your eyes to see the magic, that is, rely on unobservable mysticism, you're selling reality short. The awe of the unknown is central to Mystrikism's ethos and our naturalized, non-supernatural spirituality. We revere, simply meaning respect and awe, what we don't yet know because it beckons us to investigate further through observation, not because it's an excuse to make up fantastical answers. A classic story of empiricism in action is the question of whether all four of a horse's hooves ever leave the ground during a gallop. For a long time, people argued about it based on guesswork and what their eyes thought they saw in a blur of motion. Some paintings even depicted horses with outstretched flying hooves to assert one answer. But it wasn't until 1878, when Edward Muybridge set up a series of cameras, that we finally got the truth. Yes, there is a moment when all four hooves are off the ground, but the legs are tucked, not outstretched. The high-speed photographs settled the matter. This is empiricism. When in doubt, look, or measure, or record, rather than just speculate. Another down-to-earth example. If a child asks whether an object is hot, you can lecture about kinetic energy, or you can carefully have them touch it briefly, or observe a thermometer, to directly experience the answer. The empirical approach trusts the feedback from reality over any decree. This doesn't mean every question can be immediately answered by simple observation. Sometimes we need very sophisticated instruments or experiments, but it means that in principle, evidence from the natural world is the final arbiter. Our telescopes, microscopes, surveys, and sensors are all extensions of this basic philosophy. To know what's true, go and see. And if we can't see, directly or indirectly, then we hold off on claiming knowledge. This keeps us both humble and deeply connected to the world as it actually is. Standard 8. Logical coherence, non-contradiction. To put it plainly, truth doesn't contradict itself. If we find that an idea leads to a logical contradiction, saying two mutually exclusive things are true at the same time, then something's wrong. Mystrikism holds logical coherence as an inviolable standard. Our worldview pieces must lock together without contradiction. This traces back to one of the oldest principles in philosophy, the law of non-contradiction, which Aristotle called the firmest of all first principles. Aristotle argued that without the principle of non-contradiction, we couldn't know anything or even have a rational conversation, and modern philosophers agree it's a rule of reasoning we cannot do without. Think about it. If someone claimed A and not A are both true in the same sense at the same time, how could we possibly make sense of that? It would erase any difference between truth and falsehood. Thus, mystrics are committed to weeding out internal inconsistencies in their beliefs. If a cherished idea conflicts with another, they won't just tolerate the paradox, they'll investigate and revise until their understanding regains consistency. This is not about being stubbornly logical at the expense of humanity, but about respecting that reality itself is consistent. You can't have a square circle. You can't have an object that is fully red all over and fully blue all over at the same time. Likewise, a worldview riddled with contradictions can't accurately reflect the real world. Coherence is the scaffold that keeps our mental model of reality standing tall rather than collapsing into incoherence. Suppose someone said, "I am a strict vegetarian who eats pepperoni pizza every day." Immediately, you spot the contradiction. Pepperoni is meat, so they can't be both a strict vegetarian and a daily pepperoni eater. By the rules of logic, at least one part of that claim must be false, or they're using words in a very misleading way. In everyday life, we do this sanity check all the time. If a friend tells you, "I never lie," and 5 minutes later says, "Actually, I just lied to you," you're left in a loop of confusion. You've caught a contradiction. In serious investigative work, logical coherence is paramount too. Consider a detective who builds a timeline of events. If the suspect is claimed to be in 2 different places at the same hour, something doesn't add up. The contradiction flags an error either in the data or the reasoning. Mystrics apply the same scrutiny to big ideas. If a certain doctrine about the universe implied, say, that humans have no influence on anything, and simultaneously that humans are responsible for all outcomes, it would be internally incoherent and thus unacceptable. Cohesive thinking isn't about simplicity at all costs. Sometimes reality is very complex, but even complex truths can't violate basic logic. This standard keeps us honest and guards against the alluring trap of embracing paradoxes that resolve into nonsense upon closer examination. In Mystrikism, if 2 beliefs genuinely conflict, at least one must yield. We prefer the discomfort of revision over the false comfort of a self-contradictory truth. Standard 9. Falsifiability. Falsifiability is the principle that for a claim to be meaningful, there must be a way it could be proven false if it were false. In other words, a claim has to take a risk. If nothing imaginable could ever show the claim to be wrong, then the claim isn't really saying anything useful about the world. Mystrikism embraces falsifiability so strongly that it's explicitly listed among our core commitments. This idea was popularized by philosopher of science Karl Popper, who used it to demarcate science from pseudoscience. A classic Popper line captures it well. Those among us who are unwilling to expose their ideas to the hazard of refutation do not take part in the game of science. Mystrics echo that sentiment. If someone is unwilling to even consider what evidence would prove them wrong, then they're not really searching for truth. They're just protecting a dogma. By insisting on falsifiability, we ensure our beliefs remain testable and corrigible. It forces us to ask, what would change my mind? If the honest answer is, nothing could ever change my mind, then it's a red flag that we've strayed from an evidence-based mindset into unfalsifiable territory. Another way to view falsifiability is as a pact of intellectual courage and humility. We commit to changing our views if reality delivers contrary evidence. This turns belief into a provisional, flexible state rather than a fixed dogma. It's important to note that falsifiability isn't the same as falseness. It doesn't mean every theory must be false, only that it can be tested in principle. Theories that survive many attempts at falsification, tests, experiments, observations, gain our provisional trust. The key is that they invite those attempts. Mystrikism's methodological dogma, if we can call it that, is to dogmatically require that no belief is above questioning. Even our most cherished scientific theories are, in principle, open to being overthrown if new evidence demands it. This keeps us humble in the face of an ever-evolving understanding and guards against the real enemy, which is epistemic certainty, the refusal to ever admit error. A famous illustrative scenario, inspired by Carl Sagan, asks us to imagine someone claiming, "There is an invisible dragon living in my garage. You go to look, but see nothing." They respond, "Ah, well, it's an invisible dragon. You propose spreading flour on the floor to capture footprints. The dragon floats in the air," they say. "You suggest using an infrared camera to detect its heat." "The dragon is cold-blooded," they retort. "Every time you suggest a way to test the claim, the claimant has an excuse for why that test wouldn't work. The dragon has been defined in such a slippery way that nothing could ever falsify the claim. No observation can count against it." This is a hallmark of an unfalsifiable, and thus unreliable, claim. Compare that to a claim like, "Dragons exist and one lives in my garage," and you can see its footprints or heat signature. If you then find no footprints or heat after exhaustive checking, the claim is falsified. It took a risk by predicting evidence that failed to appear. Mystrics vastly prefer the second kind of claim, even though it turned out false, to the first kind, because at least it said something testable about reality. In more real-world terms, consider Einstein's theory of relativity. It was a bold theory, but crucially it made precise predictions, for example, about the bending of starlight by gravity during an eclipse. If those predictions hadn't been observed, Einstein's theory would have been proven wrong, and Einstein knew it. He invited the test. This is why relativity is respected, not just because it's held up so far, but because it stuck its neck out from the start. Mystrical inquiry works the same way. Any idea that wants our respect must volunteer at least one way it could be disproven. Otherwise, it's not playing the truth-seeking game. After all, if a claim can never be wrong, what meaningful content does it really have? It becomes as insubstantial as a wisp of smoke, dragon smoke. Together, these standards form a powerful toolkit. They are the invisible ground rules whenever a mystrik asks a question, investigates a mystery, or challenges a claim. Adhering to them is what gives Mystrikism its unique character, a blend of radical open-mindedness with rigorous discipline. We are open to exploring anything. No topic is forbidden. But we insist it be explored in a way that is reliable, objective, verifiable, reproducible, relevant, transparent, empirical, coherent, and falsifiable. In doing so, we channel the spirit of science and reason without losing our sense of wonder. In fact, these commitments deepen our sense of wonder because the universe that stands up to such scrutiny is far more awe-inspiring than any comfortable fantasy. We don't need to invent divine mysteries. The natural mysteries are profound enough. As the Mystrikism overview puts it, reality itself is enough. The unknown is revered precisely because it is unknown, not because it is imagined to be divine. Finally, it's worth noting how these epistemological standards reinforce Mystrikism's broader values of honesty, justice, humility, and awe. By demanding natural, empirical evidence and rejecting unfounded claims, we stay true to scientific naturalism and keep our feet on solid ground. By insisting on fairness in reasoning, objectivity, transparency, relevance, we promote a kind of intellectual justice. No idea gets special treatment, and deception has no place in resolving disputes. By building falsifiability and reproducibility into our worldview, we practice humility. We accept that we might be wrong and that future evidence may upend today's truths. This humility is liberating. It frees us from the trap of needing absolute certainty and lets us learn and grow. And through it all, we cultivate an ethos of awe. Instead of filling the unknown with wishful thinking, we have genuine reverence for it. We marvel that we have a method, however imperfect, to chip away at our ignorance. Every time one of these standards does its job, debunking a false claim or confirming a true one, it's a moment of clarity that deepens our appreciation for reality. In Mystrikism, using these can't-do-without tools is an act of both epistemic rigor and spiritual reverence. We're saying that the truth matters, the search is sacred, and we will honor it by doing it right. Each standard is thus not just a technical requirement, it is a commitment of the heart and mind to living honestly in a wondrous, knowable, yet still deeply mysterious universe.